The film begins in Albania. We're shown two thugs pulling a guy out of a trunk and starting to threaten him. This guy's name is David Packouz, and he's an international arms dealer. In the midst of what's happening, he tries to explain that he doesn't speak Albanian, but they continue as if they don't hear him. Then a third man appears, puts a gun to his face, and asks if he understands now. The weapon aimed at him is a Jericho 941 pistol, a reliable gun that can be bought on the black market for about $300.
That's a Jericho 941 pointed at my head. You can get one on the black market for $300.
After this, he begins to reflect on what people think about war. Many say it's connected to patriotism, democracy, or defending freedom. But he doesn't agree with that. When people look at a soldier, they see someone serving their country. He thinks about the cost of equipment: helmet, fireproof gloves, body armor, and M16 rifle. In total, one American soldier's equipment costs about $17,500.
It costs the American taxpayer $4.5 billion each year just to pay the air conditioning bills for those wars.
The costs go far beyond weapons and equipment. Even simple things like operating air conditioning systems in combat zones cost billions of dollars annually, and all at the expense of you, the taxpayers. We're taken back to 2005, where young David sits in a car and smokes a cigarette. A security guard approaches him and says, "He can't park here." David tries to explain that he has a client in this residential complex named Mr. Sean, and he just arrived a little early. The guard insists and says this is a gated community. He can't stay here, let alone smoke weed. David doesn't argue and just drives away. As it turns out later, David works as a masseur for wealthy clients. His life is unstable. He dropped out of college after the first semester, constantly conflicted with his parents, and has already lost 6 jobs. Finishing the session, he wipes his hands. David is only 22 years old, working in Miami Beach doing massage for $75 an hour. But he's already tired of this job and wants something better. He thinks he's found a way to change his situation. He decides to invest all his savings in buying expensive bed linens, planning to sell them to nursing homes. When he gives his presentation, the owner says the linens are too soft. David tries to convince him, explaining it's Egyptian cotton with 400 thread count, the best quality for this use. The owner still doesn't agree and says it's too expensive. David objects, "At $29 per piece, that's not expensive." Then the owner asks David, does he know the average age of nursing home residents? Turns out they're about 82 years old. He explains that using such expensive linens for them doesn't make sense. In the end, he refuses the offer. David finds himself at a dead end, realizing he spent all his savings on 65 boxes of premium linens without thinking.
I'd sunk my entire life savings into 65 cases of premium bed sheets.
Shortly after, David attends the funeral of former classmate Pete. At the wake, he tells a friend about the linen failure and that he can't return the goods because he bought wholesale. At some point, he notices a familiar face, a guy named Efraim Diveroli talking to Pete's parents. David is surprised. He thought Efraim was still in Los Angeles. Efraim was David's best friend in childhood, but in 10th grade he was sent to live with his uncle. His parents wanted to separate them, so they lost touch. After the ceremony, David meets with Efraim. He says he came back for him and that his mom won't give him David's phone number. Then he suggests going for a ride, but David hesitates. He has a client at 4 o'clock.
Fuck that shit, cancel it. Your boy's back in town.
On the road, David asks Efraim why he came back. Efraim explains. He worked for his uncle. David knows this is related to weapons. Efraim explains simply, they buy weapons at police auctions and resell online. At first, everything went well, but his uncle cheated him out of $70,000. Instead of giving up, Efraim decides to return to Miami and start his own business. While they drive, both joke like in the good old days.
But at the end, the guys have to right? Like on your chest or whatever?
David remembers how they went to buy weed together and got arrested. How they then came to school with their heads held high, as if nothing could touch them. This reminds him of a time when he didn't feel beaten down. Later, Efraim stops to buy weed. His regular dealer is unavailable, so he approaches an unfamiliar group and asks if they have any. They offer at an inflated price, calling it straight from the plantation. Efraim pays, but they don't give him the goods.
Can I get the shit?
What shit?
The ringleader starts messing with him and asks if they've seen Efraim before. then tells Efraim to get lost, showing he's armed. Efraim laughs and walks away. He opens the trunk and pulls out a weapon. David is shocked. He clearly didn't expect to see this. Efraim is calm and explains he has a gun license, then says they'll just find another dealer. Despite the tension, David can't help but notice how confident and fearless Efraim seems. Returning home, David talks to his girlfriend who's watching TV. He tells her about his day and the unexpected meeting with an old friend. The next day, while driving, David calls Mr. Bornstein to try once more to sell the bed linens. He tries to convince him again, but the answer is still negative. After this, David drives to Ephraim's office to see what Efraim actually does. He watches him conduct his business, even pretending to be a high-ranking military officer on the phone to find out competing bids.
On second thought, we're about to make a decision on those RFPs. Why don't you go ahead and just give me your bid while I got you here on the phone?
Finishing the call, Efraim greets David. He asks about what he just heard, and Efraim explains, "Sometimes you have to pose as an army officer to find out what others are offering on contracts." His business has clearly grown. He's no longer just selling online. Now he's making deals with the U.S. government.
Want to do a bong hit?
They sit together and smoke. Efraim explains he supplies weapons to the Pentagon and recently sent a shipment of gas masks to U.S. Special Forces in Iraq. He's been doing this for only a few months, but in just the last 8 weeks he's made about $200,000. Since they've known each other for a long time, Efraim starts showing David how everything works. He explains how to use the government website where military contracts are publicly posted. Instead of chasing the biggest deals, he focuses on small ones that big companies ignore. Even such small contracts can be worth millions if they're from the Pentagon. After studying the business, David returns home and lies on the couch, realizing what kind of money is involved.
Remember a few weeks ago, in the car on the way home from my mom's house?
Yes.
This happened.
The next time David meets with Efraim, he tells him about it. Efraim asks him direct questions about money and whether he can actually support a child. He points out the reality of David's situation. Then he offers to bring him into the business, saying they should work together because he trusts him. At first, David refuses. He's against everything related to war. But Efraim doesn't back down, and eventually David gives in. When it's time to explain his new job to his girlfriend, David lies. He tells her he's selling bed linens to the military, explaining that soldiers need good rest. She believes him. He hides the truth because she really dislikes war, especially since she has relatives serving in Iraq. Over the next 6 weeks, David learns quickly. He gets better at negotiations, recognizing profitable contracts, and establishing connections with suppliers. In parallel, he continues lying at home, maintaining the cover story. In this industry, people like them are called war dogs. They profit from war without participating in it. To develop the business, they partner with Ralph Slutsky, a local businessman who owns several laundromats. He agrees to finance their deals in exchange for a share of the profit. However, they don't tell him how much they're actually making and give him a different idea of the business. He thinks it's about helping Israel.
Ralph was under the impression that Efraim was an observant Jew who only dealt arms as a means to protect Israel from her enemies.
At night, the guys go to a strip club. When Efraim approaches a woman looking for her friends, he tries to impress by offering her $1,000 to service him in the car. Puzzled, she asks who he is.
Who the fuck are you?
Efraim, Diveroli.
He introduces himself and even points to David standing nearby. A moment later, a large man appears and asks what's going on. Efraim tries to brush it off, saying she's his girlfriend, but the situation quickly escalates. The man hits Efraim, knocking him onto the nearest table. David intervenes, but he's overpowered and thrown into a glass table. After the fight, both leave and go to another bar. There, everything calms down. They recall old stories from childhood, from 6th grade. David thanks Efraim for bringing him into the business, and they sit down to order food. Before the evening ends, important news arrives. A major contract is approved, thousands of Beretta pistols. The deal will bring in $600,000, David's share, $180,000. This is a huge moment showing how far they've come in a short time.
That's what I'm fucking talking about! That's real money! Fuck!
A few days later, during a hospital visit for an ultrasound, David steps out to answer an urgent call from a military contact. He's informed about a new law prohibiting the import of Italian weapons into Iraq, which directly affects their current deal. Although he's caught off guard, David pretends the situation is under control. The contract is too important to lose. The pressure builds, and he barely reacts when he learns he's having a daughter. Later, David meets with Efraim at a shooting range, and they work out a plan. They decide to first ship the weapons to Jordan, then smuggle them into Iraq from there. That same evening, at a small dinner at David's place, he learns that Efraim once took money from his own uncle, contradicting what he said earlier. Shortly after, Efraim shows up uninvited and is clearly unhappy with the gathering. They step out to talk, and Efraim delivers more bad news. The shipment is detained at customs in Jordan. At the same time, a military officer calls demanding explanations, warning that the deal will be canceled if the weapons aren't delivered. Losing this contract would destroy everything they've built, so they need to act fast.
Either way, you're endangering my mission. I'm shutting you down.
I'm canceling it for cause.
At this moment, David's girlfriend accidentally overhears the conversation and finally understands the truth. She feels betrayed, realizing he lied to her and is dealing in weapons. David tries to explain that he doesn't work with weapons directly, but it doesn't fix anything. There's no time to sort it out. David immediately leaves with Efraim to solve the problem. Arriving in Jordan, they get no help from the embassy. So, they decide to handle it themselves, pay the right people to release the detained shipment. At negotiations, a small guy translates everything they say. Then they agree on $1,400 and things start moving. They have to wait 3 days for an answer.
No, I know what it feels like to fuck somebody. I also know what it feels like to get fucked by somebody, and we just got fucked.
When they finally get a call, they have a plan. With the help of the best smuggler named Marlborough, they decide to transport the weapons to Iraq by road. David isn't thrilled about this risk, but Efraim assures him the trip will be quick and over by morning. They head to the Iraqi border.
Hey, seriously, is this safe, driving to Baghdad?
Yes, very safe. 50-50.
At night, they're stopped by soldiers at the Iraqi border. When they're answering questions, the driver reaches down, provoking the soldiers. The smuggler remains calm and offers blocks of cigarettes, assuring them that's the cargo in the truck. The soldiers agree and let them through. By morning, when David wakes up, he discovers they've stopped at an empty gas station. David gets out to look around and notices a corpse nearby. He quickly returns and tells Efraim. He remains calm and reminds him they're in a combat zone. This happens here. While Efraim steps away to relieve himself, David answers a call from his girlfriend. She says she now understands the pressure he was under and asks him to be honest with her. He agrees, though he doesn't tell her the truth about where he is.
It makes me feel like I'm in this alone.
The call is interrupted when David notices armed people in the distance. He warns Efraim, and they hurry to leave. The truck has little fuel, which worsens the situation. When they try to escape, they come under fire. At the last moment, when they realize they can't get out, American forces appear. Finally, they reach the military base without further incident. Their effort to deliver cargo along such a dangerous route, called the Triangle of Death, greatly impresses the commander, and he shakes their hands. In honor of this moment, David and Efraim take photos with the delivery before receiving payment. In the hangar where they are counting out a large sum, the guys are very surprised to see huge pallets of dollars, and the soldiers reply that all this money was taken from the Godfather.
$12.2 billion. It's all seized from the Godfather himself.
The received amount pleasantly surprises them, a whole $2,800,000. Soon they're given a military escort to the airport, and they fly back to Miami with their first major profit. Returning, they focus on further business growth. They treat themselves to matching luxury cars and move to expensive apartments in the same building. David also gets rid of the remaining bed linens from his failed venture. Their investor Ralph Slutsky is pleased with the results and increases support. Thanks to their success in Iraq, their reputation grows, and new deals start coming in, one after another. Sometime later, at a meeting in the AEY office with new employees, a simple question about what the company name means creates an awkward moment. Efraim realizes he's never really thought about it. Instead of brushing it off, he reacts aggressively and immediately fires the employee, leaving the others in silence and confusion. That same night, at home, David takes care of the baby and browses the government contracts website. He stumbles upon a huge opportunity, the so-called Afghan deal. It involves supplying a colossal amount of ammunition, including millions of rounds for Kalashnikov assault rifles. Realizing how massive this is, he quickly tells Efraim about it, who immediately wants to take it on.
100 million rounds of AK-47 ammo?
The next day, they head to a weapons expo in Nevada, looking for opportunities. But as they familiarize themselves with it, they realize that even if they win the contract, handling something so massive for such a small company will be very difficult. After all, everything comes down to logistics and a bunch of permits to transport 100 million rounds. Later at the casino, Henry Girard approaches David, a well-known name in the arms business. David immediately rushes to Efraim, but finds him entertaining himself with a prostitute.
You been? Why aren't you answering your phone? I'm with a prostitute. What's up?
Hearing that Henry has a proposal, Efraim quickly joins him. They meet at a bar where Henry lays out his idea. He explains he can supply everything needed through contacts in Albania, where large stockpiles of old ammunition are stored. When they ask why he can't do it himself, Henry explains. Due to his status, he can't work with the U.S., so he needs them to take the contract while he gets his share. David has doubts about the deal, but Efraim convinces him it's no different from what they've already been doing. They ultimately agree to move forward. David's only request: they must see the goods. So, a few days later, they fly to Albania to inspect the stockpiles. A local driver takes them to large warehouses where they're even greeted with a banner, then later escorted to warehouses filled with ammunition. They're shown everything and test some of the rounds to verify they work.
The entire defense industry was scrambling over this deal, and the key to it was sitting in 23 shipping containers in the back of a rusted-out warehouse.
Returning to Miami, they submit their bid and wait a full 5 months for the Pentagon to choose them. After 5 months of waiting, the news finally comes: they won the contract. They immediately celebrate, realizing this could change everything. But before they can fully begin work, they need to pass an official inspection. Since their paperwork isn't completely in order, they adjust the documents to make the company look more solid. Shortly after, they arrive for a meeting with a representative from the U.S. Attorney's Office. But before that, in the parking lot, they decide to smoke a joint.
Does it sound like we're more than 2 people right now?
Despite the nervousness, they manage to get through the meeting and receive permission to continue working with the military. Later, they learn they only won the contract because their price was much lower than everyone else's, by $53 million. This angers Efraim, meaning they could have made much more. At home, David prepares for another trip and tells his girlfriend he'll be away for a month in Albania. She remains calm and admits she knows more than he thought. She noticed signs from his past trip to Iraq and figured out the truth. David apologizes and claims this was the only time he hid something, saying he did it for her protection. The situation worsens when she discovers stacks of cash hidden in the bathroom. This finally destroys her trust, and she decides to leave, taking their child with her. At the office, just before David's departure, Efraim gives him a gold-colored grenade for his work abroad. In response, David presents a formal partnership agreement to formalize their relationship. Efraim signs it, but his reaction shows he's not entirely pleased. Arriving in Albania, David tries to call his girlfriend, but she ignores his calls. When there's a knock on his hotel room door, it turns out to be Bashkim, the same driver as before, assigned to him again. Later, while preparing the shipment, David notices something serious. The ammunition is actually made in China, not Albania. This creates a serious problem, since their contract doesn't allow such goods. After all, the U.S. imposed an embargo against China. He quickly calls Efraim, and together they contact Henry Girard. Instead of helping, he brushes them off and says they should have checked everything in advance. It becomes clear. Now they're on their own with a very risky situation.
Learn the difference between we have a problem and you have a problem.
David remains in Albania, not knowing how to fix the situation. A few days later, Efraim unexpectedly shows up with a plan. He suggests repackaging the ammunition to make it look like it was produced in Albania, not China. By changing labels and packaging, they can pass inspection without arousing suspicion. David understands. He has only two options: agree or walk away, abandoning a $300 million deal. Through Bashkim, they meet a local businessman who owns a packaging company. Efraim explains they need help repackaging a large shipment, but doesn't tell the whole truth, claiming it's just to reduce weight. They have 68,000 boxes. One box takes about 1 minute, which will take them 8 weeks and 50 people. He agrees to do the work for 100,000 American dollars. The guys agree because by switching from boxes to bags, they'll save $3 million on logistics. This works in their favor, and they agree. Sometime later, on December 8, 2007, they complete the first delivery of 5 million rounds to Afghanistan without any problems. A few days later, on Christmas, David goes to an internet cafe to video call his girlfriend and see his daughter. For a moment, he feels some relief from everything happening. That same night, Efraim calls with new information. He learned that Henry was overcharging them for ammunition. Despite the fact they're still making money, Efraim wants to completely cut Henry out of the deal. David immediately objects. He warns this could put them in danger. Henry isn't someone to mess with. He also points out that he's the one doing the risky work abroad, while Efraim stays home. And if Efraim goes against this, David will pull out of the deal. Efraim says he understands and promises not to do anything reckless, but it's obvious he's not entirely serious.
I'm serious, man. We're making money, okay? He's making money. The whole thing is fucking working. Don't mess with it.
Shortly after, David is picked up from the hotel at night and brought to a remote location. There, Henry attacks him and makes it clear they shouldn't have tried to push him out. After this, David decides he's had enough and plans to leave as soon as possible. Before leaving, he returns to the warehouse to retrieve important documents. The man in charge of repackaging stops him and demands payment, making it clear he knows the truth about the operation. David promises to pay as soon as he returns to the U.S. As he's preparing to leave, a woman approaches him and says she's Bashkim's wife. She reports that her husband has been missing since last night. This adds to David's anxiety, and he decides he won't return to Albania. Returning to Miami, David meets with his girlfriend and finally tells her everything about his involvement in arms dealing. He says he wants to quit and return to his previous work. After some time, she forgives him. David goes to Efraim and says he's done. He asks for his share of the money, but Efraim refuses and acts as if he's the injured party. Even when David mentions legal action, Efraim doesn't take him seriously. He broke into David's office and already destroyed their agreement. In rage, David throws the grenade Efraim once gave him at the office glass, shocking everyone around. With this, it seems, the arms dealer's story ends. 3 months later, David is working as a masseur again. One day, Ralph approaches him and says Efraim wants to settle things. They meet at a restaurant where Efraim offers David a small annual payment over 4 years of $50,000, much less than he deserves. Beside himself, David begins revealing details of their illegal activities and says he still has evidence on his laptop. He threatens to contact authorities, but Efraim reminds him this would implicate him too. The meeting ends without agreement. Soon David gets a call from the New York Times asking about the ammunition deal. This worries him. The story is coming out. He evades the answer and ends the conversation. Later, he talks to Efraim, who also received this call, and tries to act like everything's fine. David no longer trusts him and confronts his former partner directly. The tension finally breaks, and David hits him. Their relationship is over.
I'm trying to reach the Department of Defense, please.
Illegal Chinese ammunition, then we repackaged it and sold it to the U.S. military.
The case receives wide publicity, and they're perceived as young people who took advantage of government contracts. Efraim is charged and sentenced to 4 years in prison. David pleads guilty and receives 7 months of house arrest. The situation exposes serious problems in how military contracts are awarded. Years later, David returns to the quiet life of a masseur. One day he gets a surprise. Henry comes to him as a client. Seeing David's reaction, Henry remains calm and even apologizes for what happened in Albania. He thanks David for not involving him in the investigation. When David asks whether their first meeting was planned and what really happened to Bashkim, Henry evades a direct answer. Instead, he leaves a briefcase full of money and walks away, without explaining anything.